Good morning, it's 7 a.m. on Wednesday the 27th of March, and this is the 49th of 53 consecutive 5-mile walks from the Gresford Disaster Memorial to the Miners' Rescue and back again. This week on our tour of other key mining sites in and around Wrexham, we visited the northern Ply Main and Acton Collieries. Today we travel south to Plas Power Colliery, which can be found in Southsea, a village 2 miles due west of the town centre. Plas Power was opened in 1885 and closed in 1938. At its peak it employed 1,099 men. The Plas Power Colliery produced Welsh steam coal, which was delivered by rail to clients such as Cunard and P&O, the great liners, and to the steam trains of the Great Western Railway. The mine is both famous and infamous. Famous for its modernity and for being the first Welsh mine to have electricity. So groundbreaking was the mine that a deputation from Japan once visited to see what it was all about. But it also found infamy during its first year of opening, when local miners rioted in protest against Irish migrant workers taking local jobs and forcing them to leave the colliery. Today the site hasn't been overrun by a sprawling industrial estate, but by meadows to walk through and groundwork, an inclusive community training provider. There's still a lot of the old Plas Power to see. Whilst gutted, the shells of the east and west winding engine houses remain, as does the long single-storey building, which was once a row of mine workshops and now provides community training. The tallest building at the site is the old powerhouse, which until recently was an adventure centre. Despite the modernity of Plas Power, during its 53-year operation, 61 miners died. Proof that even the best equipped mines of the time remain death traps. Adding the 61 Plas Power dead to the 66 at Ply Main and the 49 at Acton, the death toll from just 3 of 38 Wrexham mines was 172. That's 65% of the Gresford total. The forgotten miners. The youngest victim at Plas Power was 16-year-old John Owen Jones, who died on 3rd of January 1883 in quite horrific circumstances. In their report on the death, the mines inspectorate described how John Owen Jones was lowering a truck down from the screens and stepped back onto the other line of rails to see whether it was far enough, and he was knocked down by the locomotive passing at the time. The driver, who was the father of the deceased, said that he whistled about 30 yards away, but that the deceased stepped back just as the engine was passing. It is supposed that he did not hear the approach of the engine in consequence of the noise made by the coal falling into the wagons from the screen. The driver, who was the father of the deceased. In part 3 of my interview with the preeminent experts on North Wales mining, Alan and Margaret Jones, we look at the public response to the disaster and the work of the Disaster Relief Fund. As well as reminiscing about various acts of kindness, both Margaret and Alan go on to commend the work of the trustees who governed the Relief Fund. Not everybody was happy, however. Indeed, there was a certain amount of bitterness levelled at the beneficiaries of the funds and the Relief Committee themselves.
We know that lamb came from New Zealand, and we know that apples came from Somerset. Children's homes sent clothes for the newly orphaned children.
Salted fish from Grimsby.
This column after column after column after column after column after column of the people who donated. Some of them donated 5 shillings, some of them donated hundreds of pounds, but people just wanted to do what they could because they all felt there were so many miners in the country, and they all felt there, but for the grace of God, go by, didn't they? But children emptied their money boxes. I personally think that they did an excellent job. There were some people who were paid, but professional people but the majority of them, from what I can understand, and particularly latterly, had no pay at all for what they did. But they were very, very clever people who sorted out the fund, because they not only paid money for the widows and children, but they also paid for the miners who couldn't go back to work afterwards. They bought tools because the men had to buy their own tools, and the tools were left down the pit, obviously, they were burned. So people who hadn't got the tools afterwards, they spent money on tools. They sent children to university. One of the comments was that they were in 1949, I think it was, they were very pleased to note that none of the children of the disaster were before a magistrate in court.
I saw that one.
Yeah. May I just tell you about Florence?
Please.
Florence died 2 or 3 years ago, and her father died in the disaster. Her brother suffered dreadfully with what you call it? I'll tell you the name in a minute. Epilepsy. He really suffered very badly. Not before the disaster, but they were a church-going family. He went to Sunday school, as he would normally go to Sunday school. The mum didn't tell him anything. He was older than Florence. The mum didn't tell them anything about the disaster and that the father had died. But the Sunday school teacher brought him to the front of the class, and he said to Florence's brother, how very sorry they were to hear about the disaster and about him losing his father. That was the first he knew of it.
Well, why didn't the mother say anything?
I think she just didn't
Just
want
tried
to
to
accept
shield
it.
it.
Okay.
Yeah. And from then on, he suffered with severe epilepsy.
Wow, so almost like a shock reaction.
Yeah. He was seen by a professor in Liverpool, and the professor said to his mother, has this young man ever suffered a really bad shock? And she said, yes, he has really. And he said he's absolutely full of shock. And this is some years later. Now that fund paid money until his death, as it did for others. Widows were looked after until death. There was bitterness, there was much bitterness. When Ruby is one of the children of the disaster, she remembers that they were treated badly in school. They weren't treated, it was thought that they had more money than other children.
They were being looked after not by the state then, but by the pension schemes and all that, so they were really hounded in school. I think the fund itself had been set up very, very cleverly. Peter was very, very bitter. One of his favourite was, he passed his 11 plus, and all his mates were having bikes, and he didn't have one, so he went to the fund, to the officers, demanded a bike, and they told him where to go, sort of thing.
This walk was dedicated to Robert Thomas, John Thornton, Ralphie Tittle, Ernest Trow, and Frederick A. Valentine.